This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and today we're going to do a smackdown comparison between the HP Envy 14 Spectre, the sort of ultrabook, definitely luxury notebook, and the 2011 13-inch MacBook Air. Both compete in terms of being kind of high-priced, high-end luxury items, being ultra-portable, but let's see how they compare when we take a deep look. As we take a look at the outside of these notebooks, obviously the HP is more unusual and striking looking. That's because it has a Gorilla Glass lid. The display is also Gorilla Glass, and the wrist rest has a plate of Gorilla Glass over it as well. So definitely unique looking. It is not a MacBook Pro or MacBook Air clone from the outside. Obviously it's a bit thicker here. The thickest edge is on the front for the MacBook Air. This guy's pretty much same thickness all the way through, 0.78 inches for the 14-inch HP Envy Spectre. MacBook Air is wafer thin in the front, as we all know. It gets thicker on the back. So if we turn it around, still a lot thicker, getting closer there, but in terms of portability, the 3-pound MacBook Air definitely wins, being thinner and a lot lighter. In terms of footprint, the Envy 14 is actually not much bigger. In fact, it's a little bit smaller going back to front over here. That's because HP managed to fit a 14-inch display and a 13-inch footprint. You'd think that means that there wouldn't be much room for ports, but aha, a lot more ports on the Envy Spectre 14 versus the MacBook Air, which is, of course, like most ultrabooks, a little bit port constrained. If we take a look at the side of the MacBook Air here, we have our combined Thunderbolt and mini display port, a USB 2.0 port, and an SD card slot. This side we have our combo mic headphone jack, another USB 2.0 port, and that's the power connector right there. Apple does not do USB 3.0 on the Airs for some reason. Goodness knows why not. Now we take a look at the Envy, and it's pretty much up there with a regular notebook in terms of the ports that it has. You got your combo mic headphone jack, and that's a Beats audio, by the way, output there. Again, SD card slot. You've got two USB ports. One of them is 3.0. You've got like Ethernet built in. Woohoo! And a full-size HDMI port and a mini display port. So while you're living large here in terms of ports. On this side, we got the Beats rotary controller, volume controls, and the power port, and that's it. So when it comes to ports and expandability, the Envy 14 Spectre is so far ahead. Now let's talk about expandability in terms of internals. Ultrabooks, well, you know, they're not the best for that. To make them so thin and light and give them the kind of unibody casings a lot of them have, they're just not meant to be taken apart. In fact, the batteries aren't even removable. You look at the bottom of a MacBook Air, and you have lots of teeny tiny Torx screws. And you can get in there and actually access your parts. You can get to the battery in there, you can get to the SSD drive, and the RAM is soldered on the motherboard. HP tries to make it a little bit more inviting to get inside. And they have this removable door here, and if you watch our full Envy 14 Spectre video review, you'll see us take this off. Take this off and you've got access to the battery. Now it's not a regular socketed battery, the kind you pop in and out like on removable notebook batteries, but a bunch of screws hold it, take those out, you've got the battery out. And right underneath the battery are two M-SATA SSD slots versus one on SSD port on the Mac. RAM is nominally upgradable on the Envy Spectre 14. Again, unusual for ultrabooks. It's usually soldered on the motherboard as it is with the MacBook Air, but in this case there actually is a regular standard notebook DIMM slot that comes with a 4 gig module. We don't know why HP isn't offering an 8 gig module yet, other than thing getting even more expensive if they did that. But the bad news is the motherboard's under here and you have to do a lot of disassembly to actually get to that DIMM port. Now we're going to open them up so you can look inside, and we're going to resume them from, they're both sleeping right now, so you can see resume times on each of them. Pretty similar. So here we are looking at the insides, and yes, indeed they do look similar. HP has been kind of copying Apple's look for the interior of notebooks. We've said it, that's it. I know you guys like to talk about that a lot on YouTube. But once we get beyond that point, the Envy actually is a little bit different because it has this raised glass, Gorilla Glass wrist rest over here. Has the usual single buttonless trackpad about the same size. Now when you're running Mac OS, nothing beats the Mac OS software and drivers for the trackpad. It's just really wonderful. Nobody in the world of Windows has quite come close yet to that. They both have backlit keyboards, and they're both better than average Ultrabook keyboards with tactile feel, better than average travel, nice white backlighting. and both of them use the top row to control multimedia keys without having to hit the FN key by default. So pretty much on par there. When we look at the displays, the MacBook Air comes with a very nice display. This is the nicest non-IPS display I have ever seen actually on a notebook. It's better than most Ultrabooks on the market in terms of viewing angles. Colors are nice and they're very natural, and you don't have to do any of that shifting the screen back and forth a whole lot just to kind of get reasonable contrast on it. Resolution is 1440 by 900 on the Mac. They go for a 19 by 10 aspect ratio versus 19 by 9 on Windows machines, so you got a slightly different ratio for pixels there, but HP one ups them in two ways actually, so perhaps they two-up them. You've got a 1600 by 900 pixel display here, so even higher resolution, and those of you who love high resolution will be thrilled with that, and I personally like it because at 14 inches that's pretty readable. When you squeeze that down to 13-inch notebooks, type is getting pretty darn teeny tiny there. The other thing it has is an IPS display, or what HP calls their HP Radiance display. So, well, you know, IPS, you just can't beat the viewing angle. It's absolutely beautiful to look at. So, very nice job there. That's what you're getting for your extra $100. Speaking of price, base price of both of these guys is pretty darn high relative to most notebooks. MacBook Air is $1299. This is the base configuration right here with the Core i5 1.7 GHz ULV CPU, 4 gigs of RAM, and 128 gig SSD drive. And this is the base quick ship Envy model for the NV14 Spectre that's going to be available in stores, or already is. And it too has a 128 gig SSD drive, 4 gigs of RAM, and a 1.6 gigahertz ULV Core i5. So 1.6 versus 1.7, not too much of a big deal. With Ultrabooks, we've seen either one coming in the base models. Occasionally you see a Core i3 not available with either of these. That's a good thing. You don't want the Core i3. It's a lot slower. The HP sells for $13.99, so you're paying $100 more. But as we're going to show you, surprisingly, you're actually getting some good stuff for your money. And this is my personal 2011 MacBook Air 13-inch here, so I'm pretty fond of it, obviously. This is my daily driver, and I was a little shocked to see that the Envy actually did offer some cool perks, like those ports, like it's a little bit easier to upgrade the internals, that kind of thing. And we'll discuss some more stuff in a bit about that. If you want to get the top of the line HP 14 Envy Spectre, you're talking about some big bucks right now. But HP might reduce the price after a couple of months, who knows? You know, they play with their prices a lot and have sales, but right now that is $18.99 for the Core i7 1.8 gigahertz, still 4 gigs of RAM, 256 gig SSD. Oddly, you get two 128 gig SSDs in the configuration instead. We suspect HP bought a lot of those 128 gig SSDs and is just trying to keep the price down there or something, but who knows? In terms of ultimate expandability, though, the possibilities are interesting there. But that machine's going to cost you $18.99. Whereas if you want the Core i7 1.8 gigahertz and a 256 gig SSD on the MacBook Air, it's only going to cost you $16.99. Both of these guys have Intel HD 3000 integrated graphics, which is perfectly capable for 2D work and play 1080p video. You can do pretty reasonable job with Photoshop, that kind of thing. Even some video editing, though. Really, you want to look at 8 gigs of RAM if you're doing a lot of 1080p video editing, and honestly, I would prefer a faster CPU too. But anyway, that said, there is no dedicated graphics option on either of these machines. And performance on the two is about equal. So if you're trying to pick up the MacBook Air to run Windows on it particularly, you're not going to get higher performance out of the Mac than you will out of the Envy. While we're talking about that now, as I said, I love my Mac. This is my Mac right here, but as you can see, I am running Mac OS. I like Mac OS just fine, and that's the way I use it because Apple has really tuned the drivers and the operating system to work best running Mac OS. If you run Windows on the MacBook Air, you can lose up to 2 hours of battery life, for example, and you're at the whim of Intel's generic HD 3000 graphics drivers in terms of performance and less exciting trackpad drivers. So honestly, if you want to run Windows and you're trying to decide which one of these to get, I would personally pick a Windows-based machine to do that. If you want to run Mac OS, which is just great, I would certainly obviously get the MacBook Air because otherwise you're looking at a Hackintosh to try to run Mac OS and something else, but it's just that much better tuned to run Mac OS. Ultrabooks in general have very good battery life, anywhere from 5 to 8 hours of real-world use, depending on which one you're looking at. And HP really went for long battery life, both with the NV14 Spectre and with their Folio 13, which is their more basic Ultrabook. And they claim 9.5 hours, which would be certainly far ahead of everything else on the market right now. In real life, we're having a hard time killing the battery. I tell you, it really does run for about 7.5 hours easily with brightness set pretty high up. And we do have to set brightness high up because this may be a nice IPS display that has good colors, wide viewing angle, and yes, accurate res, but bright it is not. HP really didn't go with much brightness. The MacBook Air on average lasts me about 6 hours, so yes, the NV14 Spectre actually does last longer on a charge. They're both quite good though, that said. In terms of heat and fan noise, well, Macs sometimes get a bad rap for being hot and noisy. The MacBook Air, after a nice little firmware update or two and some OS tweaks on the Mac OS side, this guy actually now runs pretty cool and pretty quiet. I can touch the bottom without saying ouch. The fan doesn't come on much even when I have it hooked up to my giant 30-inch Apple Cinema display and play Adobe Flash. So both fairly cool and quiet machines. Both have webcams, both have integrated microphones, but HP has another little special something here. This guy comes with Beats audio, and you've got a rotary controller that we showed you in our full review of the NV Spectre 14. And you've got dedicated controls on the side for mute and for settings for Beats audio. And wow, what a difference in sound. Now, the MacBook Air, it sounds like your average Ultrabook. Kind of thin, kind of tinny, not too loud, but gosh, it is pretty small and light. How much can you do? The stereo speakers that are on this NV Spectre, wow, they really put out a huge amount of volume. I mean, you can get really obnoxious with it. I've never run it over 50% volume because it's that loud. It's very full. Of course, it's Beats audio and it's on the bass heavy side, but you can adjust your EQ settings if you're not so into bass, for example. And when we plug the same set of external high-quality stereo speakers into these guys, what a difference. The Beats audio just sounded so rich and so full. We played some movie trailers and it was really nice. With the Mac, it's just, well, it's okay sound. Both of these guys can drive very large monitors. For example, my Apple 30-inch cinema display that I mentioned, or those giant Dell XPX displays that use not HDMI, because that doesn't go high enough in terms of resolution, but you can use DVI mini DisplayPort in this case for both of these guys. And they perform equally well doing that. I noticed that in general, Windows actually drives displays with a little bit more brightness and contrast, which is interesting, but both up to that task. Of course, this also has HDMI, so you can just plug this easily into your TV if you want to, or your HDMI monitor if you don't have one of those big jumbo monitors. And it also has Intel WiDi wireless display, so if you've got the Netgear push to TV or something like that, you don't even have to hook up any cables to send this over to your TV. Pick up that $99 adapter, plug it into an HDMI port on your TV, and you can stream wirelessly or use extended desktop even. So you can have your main desktop here on the Envy and your second display be wirelessly your HD TV and just throw a movie over there. Pretty cool stuff. And it supports copy protection and all those other goodies, so yes, you can even play copy protected media to your TV. So that's the HP NV14 Spectre versus the 13-inch MacBook Air. And we really have to give HP a couple of nods here. We're a little bit hard on them in our review of the product, but in terms of looking for something that's innovative and different, boy, they really have done it here. I mean, nothing else looks like this notebook, nothing else feels like this notebook, and it's really a gorgeous piece. Everybody's been chasing the MacBook Air design in Ultrabooks. We've seen that with the Asus ZenBook. It's very attractive. Even Dell XPS 13 is a good-looking feller. But wow, instead of just kind of copying that kind of metal look, HP just did something really superb here, aesthetically speaking. And for those of you who looks count, that's something that's worth noting. But beyond that, they've actually given you something for your money. Again, at $100 more for the base price, to sum it up, you get more ports. You get better expandability. You get an IPS display that's even higher resolution and a little bit bigger while maintaining the same footprint. What do you lose, though? You gain a pound of weight, and for those of you who are looking for a really ultra-portable, that could be an issue. And it is also thicker. It may be thinner than most notebooks on the market, the NV at 0.79 inches, but it's sure a lot thicker than the MacBook Air and some of the competing around $1,000-ish Ultrabooks, say the ZenBook, the XPS 13, the Toshiba Portage Z830. We'll be doing some more Smackdown, so stay tuned with some of the more, shall we say, normal, less designer 13-inch Ultrabooks on the market versus the MacBook Air and versus each other. Don't forget to watch our video reviews of these products, read our written reviews, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.